I'm Kristi Fairholm-Mader. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm located here on the unceded territories of the Algonquin-speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. I want to introduce my co-host, Emma. Emma, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Emma Ron Arcos and I work at BCSPI Canada as the Communications and Education Coordinator. I am living, working, and enjoying life in the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and really happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Emma. And as mentioned, I'm Kristi Fairholm-Mader. I'm with Scale Collaborative, and part of our role as Scale is to be the project manager of the BC Social Procurement Initiative. The focus of our work at Scale is on vendor engagement, supplier outreach, and social enterprise development and support, as well as providing support to the project as a whole and taking a lead on impact measurement. So today I'm going to provide some context, and then we're going to open it up for a conversation with our speakers. And then at the end of that, we'll have time for comments and questions, and feel free as we go through to put things into the chat as they come up, and then we will come back and be able to grab those and fill in any additional questions as we come. We are also going to sort of, as we go through, pop links into the chat with useful resources and places that sort of you can go to for more information. We're going to record the session and provide a summary to attendees at the end of the session and at the series. So first off, BC Social Procurement Initiative is a local government member-led initiative where we're thinking of and working through community and benefit-driven procurement, and then be able to share that learning and best practices across all the members that participate. So we can advance, measure, and collectively engage around social procurement, around benefit-driven procurement, while still remaining flexible and adaptable to the needs of each community. And so this is the goal, is to be able to help local governments and institutional purchasers, so hospitals, school boards, libraries, those kind of folks that also make community level purchases, to align their purchasing to their strategic goals. Currently, we have 30 participating member organizations. We just had Ucluelet join this week, so congratulations, Ucluelet. And we really range from, mid-sized cities like Greater Victoria to really small rural municipalities, Tofino, Port Hardy, Squamish, and all the size. And this is where the power of the collectives comes in terms of that shared learning and being able to take what's happening over here and be able to apply and share across the membership. As I talked about, it's really about focusing, aligning procurement to meet strategic community goals and to receive a measurable social value from dollars that are already being spent. So when we talk about social, we're providing an umbrella for the myriad of issues that are facing local communities today, recognizing that the environment, local economies, and social impacts are all intertwined. And so some of the outcomes that are being focused on in BCSPI are on inclusive and quality employment, apprenticeships and training opportunities, looking at diverse supply chains, and community benefits that turn up in many different ways. We do have a regular introduction to social procurement that we offer through our website that's available for people who'd like to know more about what we're doing and how that strategic social procurement strategies are being deployed. The BCSPI members have access to a whole host of resources via the online membership portal. This includes best practice examples, really developed out templates and guides, including draft RFP and policy templates that can be used and adapted, the access to customized consultation, coaching, and support from the BCSPI team. There's core training, there's a self-directed knowledge hub, and there's a really robust webinar library. And we continually put on learning events such as these. And we can do training both, as general, but also customized to our members. There's an access to an online resource, stocked with social procurement examples from BCSPI members and from other communities. And there's a thriving bi-monthly community of practice where implementers get to come together and talk about what's working and where they're facing challenges. And we're beginning to build out and do more around supplier engagement, vendor engagement, and capacity building and impact measurement tools. And so this is what the back end of the member resource looks through, that members can have access to this myriad of resources. The service delivery team is a mix of procurement experts such as BCSPI Canada that Emma is working with, ourselves, Scale Collaborative, the Construction Association, and procurement experts. And you can see who we are on our website. In the first 2 years of operations, BCSPI was able to measure 50 pilot projects that were done by our members and about $200 million in social procurement related spend. And this past summer, the initiative was expanded from Vancouver Island and the coast to BC-wide. So when we look at aligning local government and institutional purchase priorities to their procurement and purchasing power, procurement becomes another tool for governments to use to build healthy communities and inclusive economies. We polled our members and asked, what are the critical topics facing communities today that could benefit from a procurement alignment? And from that, the most pressing issues where procurement could play a role is where we've centered this series around. So engaging Indigenous businesses, supporting local economies, increasing food security, addressing equity and diversity and inclusion, and addressing climate change. And so we structured this series as a place to have conversations around what is possible. And for each of the sessions, we invited 2 to 3 speakers that represent both a local government or institutional purchaser perspective and a vendor perspective. So we're really looking at the 2 sides of the conversation. And the goal is to understand some of the challenges, provide examples of what's being tried and where we're seeing innovation and what's working, and then to imagine what is possible. And again, we'll continue to provide resources through the session. Indigenous procurement has been of increasing focus of federal and provincial government procurement goals. And you can see that they've conducted a number of surveys, reports, and the federal government has set a 5% target of spends over $5 million to Indigenous owned and led enterprises. And so we'll include these resources in the chat and reports for your interest. However, procurement is a technical and complicated system and requires significant upfront capital and capacity to bid on $5 million and above projects. And there's a significant opportunity for local governments and institutional purchasers to meet their own goals for Indigenous procurement and purchasing needs that also provides greater opportunities for smaller businesses to gain experience in bidding and delivering on procurement contracts. Local governments and institutional purchasers are much closer to the ground. They have an opportunity for relationships and increased engagement and often operate with budgets more in line to small businesses. They can use their discretionary spending and direct awards under the free trade agreement thresholds to reduce the administrative barriers to procurement. And this can help ladder vendors towards the RFP process. So we can see in this diagram that it's really looking at how procurement and engagement with government can be a laddering process where we're not having to see that right up front capital and human resources investment, but that businesses are allowed to grow in their capacity while still delivering great value to those purchasers. And in terms of value, we want to make clear that the goals of quality, price, environment, and social are all part of the consideration, with the overall goal of having good products and services that meet the buyer's needs. And as Ron will say, I don't want to steal your thunder here, Ron. There's no desire for handouts, but rather looking at ways to engage, to build capacity and address barriers to small and Indigenous enterprises engaging in those government contracts. So that's the space that we want to talk about and where we see real opportunity with BCSPI members and local governments and institutional purchasers. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. We have Judy Kitts as the First Nation Engagements Manager for the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. Her role includes increasing the recognition of the Algonquin people in and around the facilities and land the GVHA manages, and supporting economic development initiatives through the First Nations Economic Development Committee. Judy has worked in Indigenous relations for more than 10 years, and most recently, she worked at the Port of Vancouver, leading consultation with Indigenous groups on port development projects. She's honored to live and work in Victoria and the traditional territories of the Esquimalt Nation and Songhees Nation. And we have Ron Arcos, the Business Development Officer at the Nuu-Chah-Nulth Economic Development Corporation, NEDC, which is based in Port Alberni. He took this job after retiring as a commercial account manager with a major Canadian bank. He doesn't want to say which one. Ron holds a BA degree in history from the University of Victoria and has also completed certificate program studies in economic development at Simon Fraser University and the University of Waterloo, in association with the Economic Developers Association of Canada. And he was the past director of the Community Futures Development Corporation of Port Alberni, Clayoquot. So I'm going to unshare my screen. And so we can see our speakers. And we're going to start with some questions. So let me just get ourselves set up. All right. So Ron, let's start with you. tell us a little bit about the Newtown Economic Development Corporation and just why it was established.
Certainly. NEDC was founded in 1984, and it was created to serve the Nuu-chah people. There's 14 tribes within the tribal council, and most of the nations are located on the west coast of Vancouver Island. It's sometimes known as the wet coast. There's on Vancouver, the population of the Nuu-chah is about 10,000 people. On Vancouver Island, that's our service area. That's who our directors have indicated. That's who we serve. And the Nuu-chah share Vancouver Island with two other major tribal groups, the Coast Salish in the south and the Couples up north. And I work with two other development officers, and we service the island. You know, I've got clients in Victoria, I've got clients in Port Hardy, and we travel as needed. The goals is to create Aboriginal wealth. That's the mission. And we do that by delivering programs and loans. And right from day one, the founders wanted NEDC to be working on viable projects. So we don't get into politics. We're totally apolitical. We look for viability, commercial viability.
Thanks, Ron. So, and how about for you, Judy? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority?
Sure. My name is Judy, and I'm joining you from Fernwood in Victoria in the Lekwungen territory. And I've been working with the Harbour Authority for the last 3 years. GVHA manages some properties in Victoria, including the Victoria Cruise Ship Terminal, Fisherman's Wharf, the Inner Harbour Marina, and Lower Causeway. And on our board of directors, we've had a Esquimalt Nation and Songhees Nation as part of the organization since 2002. We're made up of 8 different member agencies. So I suppose over the last, well, since inception, but certainly over the last few years, we've really been focusing on Indigenous reconciliation, including economic reconciliation. And so part of my role at the Harbour Authority has been finding opportunities to work with local Indigenous businesses. And I guess that's what brings me here today.
Ron, can you tell us more about the type of enterprises that you support, the breadth and the sectors of what's happening in your region?
Certainly. Our client base is quite diverse. We deal with a lot of entrepreneurs. Some of them are well-established businesses, other ones are startup. We also work very closely with different nations on Vancouver Island. And each nation is different, just like every person is different. And what we look for is to help with their economic initiatives. And over the years, I've worked with nations that were, a few years ago, there was a major initiative to do run-of-river projects, green energy. And NEDC worked with the Aboriginal proponents. And you know, the kind of financing we did would be in the low $2 or $3 million, because those were mega projects. And then we've worked with other ones where, you know, my favorite was always the people who looked after pets, like dog groomers and that. And I've done about 4 or 5 on the island. So it's a wide mix. But what we look for is, you know, commercial viability or reasonable expectation of commercial viability. So we do require a business plan and thought to go into a financing request.
Great. And now we get to the big question is, you know, from working with so many Indigenous entrepreneurs across the island and the region. And I know that, you know, you're part of a network of organizations that also do similar kind of work across BC, and we'll drop some of that in as we get later around resources. But what would you say has been the experience or some of the experiences of Indigenous entrepreneurs in doing business with government?
Well, it's a mixed bag, and it's been inconsistent. You know, it seems to be one year it's great, things are happening, and next year, you know, like you have to start from scratch. That's what we've seen here.
Talked a little bit about when you and I talked earlier about like some of the challenges about becoming qualified providers. I'm wondering if you could talk about that more.
Certainly. Our portfolio consists of different type of businesses, and I'm thinking of one in particular on Vancouver Island. And this business is Aboriginal owned. It's a union shop. They have a fleet of trucks, and they were trying to get in with BC Hydro. And you know, they did all the right things and nothing would click. And fortunately, they persevered and they kept at it and kept at it. And then they were at some meeting and they met the person that, gee, I understand you want to get into this. And they said, yeah. So, and from there, everything clicked. And we hear that from other clients too, where they're trying to get in with government. And for whatever reason, they do what they have to do, and it doesn't click. So they have to persevere. And sometimes, I guess, you just got to get lucky. And it shouldn't be like that.
Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the time frame of contracts being released in the actual procurement process, and where that you've seen some challenges, or you've heard from entrepreneurs you've worked with around some of the challenges around that?
Well, what I find from experience working with clients, if there's an RFP, it should be within a reasonable time period. 10 business days, I think, is standard for something that's not complicated. The worst thing is for NEDC to be approached on a Thursday because the client found out on Wednesday that this RFP is out, and the decision, everything has to be in by Monday. So that kind of time frame just doesn't make sense. And to me, also, the people who want to be looking for these contracts, they have to be qualified. And there's quite a few qualified businesses that could undertake it. They got the capacity and the financial resources. All they're looking for is the opportunity.
And one of the things that we chatted about earlier as well was you talked about getting a good idea of what's coming down the road, and being able to understand what's happening across different governments, that because we have so many local governments, that what they need is often different, and each one's slightly different. But is there a way to begin to look at collectively what might be needed and how that might allow a more collective response?
Sure. Perhaps it all comes down to preparation. If the municipalities, each one or as a group, could sort of have a hit list of what kind of services and products they'd be looking to outsource. If they could do that and get it out to NEDC and the other Aboriginal capital corporations in British Columbia, there's TAC in Park Royal, there's Tricor in Prince Rupert, ANCO, they service most of the interior of British Columbia. And that way we can check with our clients to see who would be receptive, and that would help that turnaround time, almost like a pre-qualification, for want of a better description.
I'm going to switch to Judy and start building in the procurement side. Judy, can you talk about what the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority currently does related to Indigenous procurement, just your overall approach?
Sure. So I'm not in procurement, so I'm learning as I go, but obviously in working in Indigenous relations at the Harbour Authority, procurement is part of that economic reconciliation that I work on. And so I suppose I was motivated by the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses call to, encourage both the provincial and federal governments, but also other businesses to look at a 5% procurement spend. I'm a girl that likes a goal. And so I went back to our manager of finance to kind of see what is our procurement right now. So we did some polling and found out we were sitting at 0.5%, 1.4%, 2%, depending on the year. And so the first thing I figured is, if we were going to be successful in procuring goods from Indigenous vendors, I needed a list of Indigenous vendors that we could procure from. So in 2019, we met with over 30 Indigenous-owned businesses here in Greater Victoria. This was pre-pandemic times. It was very fun. So it was coffees and chats and phone calls, but we would meet with them to learn about what they do. And I would bring along with me, because I'm not the purchaser in the organization, I'd bring with me our director of infrastructure, our director of marketing, our office manager, who could learn about the vendor, whether it be like a cleaning supply company or a graphic design firm. So we did, like I said, about 30 different meetings, and we built a list of now over 45, which is on our website here in Victoria. And then from that, we started to do probably a bit more around direct awards. So we're not a big purchaser, we're a pretty small company. So we're not going to be the one that probably keeps somebody's doors open, but we're certainly in that latter process and probably at the bottom of a small direct award that we can do. And then in doing that, we did things like defining our influenceable spend. So not all of our spend is influenceable. Things like our insurance isn't and our rent isn't. So we removed that to sort of try to create a percentage, I guess, that is, and then look at 5% goal out of that. So we created targets and we defined Indigenous business with our local partners, the Esquimalt and Songhees. And yeah, we've been doing a lot over the last few years, but pandemic times has really kind of put that a little sideways, but yeah.
And in reflecting the work that you've done and what you've learned, what would you say are some of the best practices or things that you've learned along the way that are challenges to overcome, or things that you've done that you think have worked really, really well? So kind of either side in terms of your learning journey.
Yeah, probably the best thing we did was go and meet the businesses. So I think it was just really valuable to create better relationships between the Harbour Authority and the local nations, but also just to put a face to our organization and to really know firsthand what they do. Not all Indigenous businesses have websites that you can visit to learn about. So the meetings in person were really helpful. So I highly recommend pounding the pavement safely in COVID times. But I think that was really valuable. And I really do believe, you know, what the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business says, that, you know, what gets measured gets done. And so creating the targets that we have. So we started with a 2% operational goal, 3% capital goal. We've raised them now to 3% operational, 5% capital. I just think having those targets and then being able to, you know, meet quarterly with your manager of finance to sort of see where you're at is really helpful. It can be discouraging every quarter if you're not there, but it can be quite encouraging to say, hey, we need to reach out to these businesses and find opportunities. So I think those things have been really good. Relationships, meeting with people, and creating targets.
Yeah, and I noticed, I mean, you sent to us this sort of an impact report or a bit of your lessons learned in terms of your Indigenous relations report around that. I'm going to pop it into the chat because it summarizes and talks to some of what you were just mentioning around that in terms of those lessons learned.
Great.
Ron, back to you. I'm wondering, in from your perspective, how do you think procurement systems and structures could engage Indigenous businesses more effectively?
Well, I think this type of meeting is very beneficial because it opens the door. It's not quite a bridge, but it does open the door, and this sort of allows for more dialogue, because really it does come down to preparation. I should, just on a point of clarification, I should point out that for NEDC, we were created to serve the Nuu-chah-nulth, but our client base is, as long as they're Indigenous. So that would be, that includes Métis, and includes Inuit. Some of the clients I work with are Mohawks from Quebec. They're living in Port Alberni and they're within our service area. So we try and have a very open attitude. As long as they can prove their Indigenous ancestry, we can help them. So going back to what you're saying about the directory, I think is a great idea. The challenge I've encountered over the years is that they don't get updated on a regular basis. And sometimes, you know, just trying to make contact with a business that, you know, went out, you know, 5 years ago, they ceased doing business, or they changed their business type. So, you know, a directory that's updated on a regular basis would be very, very useful. And we have some Aboriginal groups in Vancouver and British Columbia, like the New Relationship Trust. They should be a contact because they work with all the nations in British Columbia.
And you talked a little bit about how that there might not be a directory. I mean, and there's different directories in different places. We've been popping them into the chat, the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses. We can see, you know, we're seeing local directories pop up. You know, I think the BC government has a directory that they're working. So there's like a tourism directory. There's a few different directories that are popping up around. But I also thought it was really I thought your suggestion around people being able to contact you and what NEDC also could do in terms of making those connections. And so I'm wondering what would happen if a local municipality or an institutional purchaser had wanted to reach out and find contract matches. If they contacted you, what would happen, and what do you think are the opportunities there?
Well, That would be very beneficial, because then if NEDC was approached by a would-be purchaser and they're looking, they have clearly stated goods or services they're looking to acquire, then we can try and match it up with the clients we work with or that we know of. The client base is quite diverse, and they're involved in all sorts of undertakings.
And you talked a little bit about, because of your hands-on experience with your clients, you have a good idea of who has capacity to bid and deliver, and that where they are and how there might be a way to make that right fit and right match, so that that's a successful, successful relationship and outcome.
Yes, absolutely. Last year, despite COVID, there was a major project happening on Vancouver Island, and one of the proponents, they were trying to get a contract, and they had the Aboriginal component for procurement, and it's one of the biggest companies in Canada in construction. So for this major project, they actually came out, and we met here in Port Alberni, and they told us what they were looking for, and we're able to match them up with would-be service providers. They got their submission in, and of course, from there, different things happened, and guess what? Project didn't happen. But it was very useful preparation. The person that was involved at the construction company, as I say, it's a major entity in Canada. It's one of the biggest, and they had dedicated resources, and I was quite impressed, how they could put things together, what they wanted, and it was fine-tuned. But I guess in life, things don't happen when they should.
It does open that opportunity for often local governments and institutional purchasers are doing infrastructure builds, right? And that does bring in larger companies often to different communities. And you mentioned like the opportunity for partnerships. Can you talk more about the opportunity for partnerships between Indigenous businesses and other larger organizations that might come in, and how maybe procurement or purchasers can help facilitate those partnerships?
Certainly. NEDC gets approached on a regular basis by non-Indigenous groups outside of Vancouver Island, and they're looking to try and link up. They have either a project or a development or what have you. And over the years, we've learned there are certain keywords that matter. So when this would-be proponent contacts NEDC, if they say, we're looking to do this and that, what we want to do is create wealth, then we know there's probably a good viability, good chance of making things click. A warning sign is when we get approached and they say, oh, we want to create jobs, because very often those jobs are not sustainable. And, we've learned the hard way in some of the nations we work with.
What's the difference for you between wealth and jobs?
Well, sustainable jobs bring wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good paying jobs. That's why we like doing the Ron River projects, because there are not many jobs after the projects are done, but they're steady. And as long as the rivers flow, the turbines turn. There's jobs. There's usually about 2 good paying jobs full time, and and they're other jobs, other projects come along, they'll talk about all these jobs, but when you really look at it, like how many sustainable jobs are there? And sometimes there's disappointment on all sides.
So really looking at that long-term view.
Exactly.
Judy, I'm wondering what you can say are some of the positive impacts that you've seen as a result of GVHA taking this procurement approach or this strategy, both for the Indigenous communities and businesses you work with, as well as for you as an entity that's doing business.
Great. Well, Victoria is a small place. And so one of the real positive things in sort of moving forward with our directory and the relationships we built with some local Indigenous businesses is that it's really snowballed. I get emails like almost weekly about Indigenous businesses and from Indigenous businesses now that, just yesterday I was able to connect an Indigenous. So we don't have a big budget right now due to our loss in revenue due to the cruise suspension. So what I've really been able to do over the last year is help connect Indigenous businesses with other folks. So yesterday I was able to connect them over to Helijet in Harbour Air and to Western Stevedoring, maybe where they wouldn't normally get an introduction. And so the kind of snowball effect is really real here. And I feel that both on the nation side. So when I meet with the business, like a local Indigenous business in Victoria, they're also small communities too. And so when they go home and sit at the table, I feel like maybe they share their story. And then, I get a call from their auntie or their uncle who also has a business. And so the directory really did grow quite organically, which was really nice. But yeah, I think it's been also helpful internally as a organization that has a commitment to First Nations relationships and partnerships, where our employees really want to see that in practice. Like, it's not enough for it just to be a principle anymore. People want to see what actions the organization is taking. And so the work that I've been doing over the last few years around procurement that have led to contracts with Indigenous owned businesses has been one of the ways we've been able to show to our employees that our commitment is real and it's actioned.
And that is one of the powers of procurement, is that you can measure it. Right. We can put things in, you can measure what's required. We have evaluation criteria, it's standardized, and this is a really beneficial way of being able to, as we talk about, like, use procurement to achieve some additional community goals and benefits. Yeah. Ron, and for you, what do you think are the benefits to communities and to governments when they do business with Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Well, we keep dollars local, and you get the multiplier effect. To me, that's a genuine win-win. But we should also be looking at, the stats. In Canada, there's about 600 First Nations. BC has like 200 of them, and on Vancouver Island, we got 50. So, there's a huge mix. And some of the nations are very entrepreneurial, and they're involved in different types of businesses. So, it all depends, what the opportunity is. And also too, I think it's really important never to generalize that if an Indigenous entrepreneur approach is looking to connect with the municipality, that Indigenous person may be from, that person may be living in BC, but they may be from Quebec or Ontario or Newfoundland. Like, never assume anything. And we do look for, and an Indigenous person has a proof of Aboriginal ancestry. We always ask for that. There's nothing wrong for asking for that.
Before we move to questions, I'd like to have from each of you is what is one critical advice that you would give to purchasers who want to increase their engagement with Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses? Judy, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think I've already said it, but I do really feel like it's really important, and that's just the relationship building. I think it's not enough to send an email or, a social media post that says, like, we're looking to, meet some Indigenous businesses. I think you really got to get out in the community and meet with people and go for coffee and learn. A lot of what I have, a lot of the success we've seen is because it's been really relationship based, and we've invested a lot of time in those relationships. Even during the pandemic, when we weren't procuring anything, we took an opportunity to reach back out and see how they were doing and connect and try to share those resources. So I really couldn't encourage you enough to, like, when you get off the call today, to do that, right? And to maybe start with, one of the directories that are shared here, to reach out to a business and just really take the time to do that in that kind of more personal way.
How about you, Ron? What advice would you give to purchasers who want to increase their engagement with Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses?
Exactly what Judy said. It's baby steps. It takes time, and it's also too. You have to be realistic. What someone, what the objective is. I'm a big fan of baby steps. Start out small and make it grow. And sometimes the growth can happen in spurts, but you gotta first make that connection. So probably to start off with, if a municipality is looking to connect, they can contact NEDC. The general manager here is Al Little. We have sister entities in British Columbia. And I mentioned before, there's TAC and Park Royal. There's Tricor in Prince Rupert, All Nations Trust in Kamloops. And that would be a very good way to start to try and get things happening.
Thank you. So I want to just open up for people to feel free to put your hand up and put a question into the chat. If you are doing Indigenous procurement or engaging with Indigenous enterprises, we'd love to hear about what's working. Like, this is an opportunity to have a conversation and share some of our best practices and ways that we can advance together. And so, yeah, I'd love to feel free to pop in the chat or to unmute or put your hand up and share or ask any questions.
Sorry, I think I have a question. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sid Mehta. I work at Simon Fraser University as Senior Director for Ancillary Services. We manage a portfolio of food along with all other services, business services on behalf of the university on all 3 campuses. I guess looking towards an ambition to bring more food on campus, whether it's education, whether it's access, or whether it's, you know, from an inclusive perspective. I wonder if people had thoughts or learned experiences on where to start. I kind of like the idea of meeting for coffee as step 1, but if there are more ideas around that, I'd be receptive to hearing today or later on after this call. Thank you.
Do you want to put your email contact in the chat, and then people can maybe reach out and engage that contact, or, you know, that's one way to do it. Thank you. We have a question from the chat that's asking, Judy, you know, what prompted you to raise your targets for Indigenous procurement?
Great question. We met them, I guess is what it was. And we had both operational and capital targets, and our capital target was 3% over 3 years, and we had 42% in 2019 because of a large capital project we procured with a local Indigenous owned business. So I felt like 5% would probably be good, but we kept the capital over 3 years because we do see quite a bit of fluctuation year to year. So our capital is at 5% over 3 years. I think that's sustainable, but again, we'll see. And then the operational one, we had met it, and we met it, I think, with a medium level of effort, and we know more now. And I don't know, I like a stretch goal, and we for sure will not meet it this year. In 2021, it's been a really difficult year for the organization, but what I'm doing to demonstrate to our board is to show the efforts that we've made and the other initiatives we've led around kind of champion work and promotion of local businesses rather than just our direct procurement. But yeah, I guess we met them, and I like a stretch goal.
Great. And both to Judy and to Ron, when you're seeing those goals being achieved, how much are direct awards a part of that? Like, what percentage of procurement are you seeing coming that's a direct award versus going through the RFP process? I'm wondering, let's start with Judy and then to Ron.
Sure. I'm working with a lot of small local businesses that are really just starting out and kind of even in the incubation stage. And so a lot of mine have been direct award, and you know, for transparency, that's under $20,000 at the Harbour Authority. And so these aren't, like I said, awards that will keep the doors open, but it is a little bit that helps to sustain. And we've had larger RFPs go out on capital projects generally that have went to Indigenous owned businesses. But again, we're pretty small in scale, so I could probably name 1 or 2 or 3 direct RFPs that have been successful with local Indigenous businesses, whereas a direct awards, I've probably done 100 kind of thing.
And Ron, for you as well, as to build on this question coming in from the chat, what do you see in terms of direct award or requests for proposals? And there's a question is here, has anyone been awarded contracts under a set aside program?
No one that I've worked with. There's two other development officers here. I don't know if they're aware of it.
Okay. And do you see sort of the in terms of direct award and RFP, what do you say is where you see most of the business coming from?
I would say the direct award, because that would allow for quicker turnaround.
Mhm. Yeah, and if we think back to that laddering slide that we put up, that's where, again, like institutional purchasers, community-based purchasers, local governments, that direct award and laddering towards procurement, because when we get to RFPs of federal government, provincial government, those are, BC bid, they're very, so it allows this place here to again build that capacity and see and support any of our small businesses to be able to achieve and deliver on more government contracts. So I think it makes sense that at this level, where Ron and Judy and many of our members do that, the potential for using your small spends, your purchasing that you use through your P cards, the purchasing that you do through your direct awards, and then laddering towards RFPs you can do a lot of work in there. Brenda, you have a question? I'd love for you to unmute and tell us what you think.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It is around what I'm just interested in. So I'm just wondering, with other municipalities at the city of Winnipeg, our direct awards go up to $10,000. With trade agreements, anything else has to be basically go through the RFP process. And I think you've touched on it a bit, but are there any other ways to support Indigenous businesses that you can think of with trade agreements in place?
No, I agree with what you're saying. That, to me, that's the way to go. You start out small and then you keep, things happen.
Okay, thank you.
So we see a difference between what the trade agreement says, which is, 75,000 and below for goods and services direct award. And that's the Northwest trade agreement. So it's the other ones have a bit more latitude in them. And then we have most organizations have an internal threshold policy. And so one of the questions that we encourage members to look at is, where does that internal threshold policy make sense, and where does it contain or confine the ability to do some of the direct awards in the areas that they want? And that's a conversation that each organization needs to have. But getting sort of looking at where the opportunities are in that is a good thing to look at. So
I can add there.
Oh yeah, please do, Judy.
To what Tori just mentioned in the chat box, but the subcontracting can be really beneficial too. So, in our RFP process, in our weighting, you might give points to partnerships with Indigenous businesses or employment opportunities. And so in the past, when we have had a successful RFP with a non-Indigenous business, they would make a commitment to have, Indigenous flaggers or Indigenous partnership of some local subcontract, so excavation or something like that. That would, again, maybe the business couldn't take the whole RFP overall, but you kind of getting a chunk of the work or a piece of the work to sub, I guess, a local Indigenous partner and business has been successful at the Harbour Authority and a couple of other places that I've worked. So, but I see Tori mentioned that, but that might be another way outside of direct award where you can find small pieces can be integrated into the larger piece.
Thank you.
Renata, I'm not quite sure of your question. I'm wondering if you would mind unmuting and asking. I think this will be our last question before we go to sort of wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks everyone for the presentation. I'm just wondering, I know with some, government and municipalities, we kind of cling to this equal opportunity when we look at, awarding direct awards or contracts. And so some organizations are, hesitant when we talk about conversations to kind of like level the playing field a little bit. So I'm just wondering how, how people are addressing that conversation with individuals in procurement and in finance about, we need to look past this idea of just equal opportunity and actually kind of set some goals for social procurement moving forward.
I can speak a little bit to it, I guess. I think at the Harbour Authority, part of our journey in Indigenous reconciliation has been just, Indigenous cultural training and getting better informed about, why we're doing what it is we're doing around procurement and around our partnerships and around even our employment targets and things like that. And without that background and understanding, of which there is considerable at the Harbour Authority, I think there could be possibly more pushback or more questions. And so like this on itself alone might feel confusing or unclear. And so what we've been doing is continually providing staff with lots of opportunities to learn about, the history of Canada, of colonization, of where we're at today, I guess, in order to help inform why we have the goals that we do, whether they be around EDI goals or specifically around Indigenous procurement and relations. But yes, I think without that, I would expect people to be uncertain about why we're motivated to do this. I don't know if that answered, but. Okay.
No,
I'd like to build on that. Oh, sorry, Renata.
I was just saying thank you. I think that foundation is really important for being able to have open and honest conversations when you're looking about making change, right?
Yeah, it's a whole cultural change, really, a change management program, I think, that happens organizationally, and this is just one small component of that.
And I'd like to add around that there's a really strong, there's a lot of strength when you understand your why, which is what Judy's talking about, that why of you're doing this, why is this an important, policy to put in place or initiative, or what is the challenge that you're trying to right or change? And that we can see even in some of the reports that we put into the chat for you, there's a real grappling of the why, even around what do we call an Indigenous business? Is that 50%? Is it 51%? Is it co-ownership? And that there is a place of just trying to really understand what works for your community in conversation with the nations that are in your sharing space and land with, that you're on the land of. And so there's a lot of conversations to take place that can be multi-layered. I think that really, part of why we landed this in engaging Indigenous businesses is because this is the purchasing part, right? That we can do a lot by directing and looking at where we purchase from, and that multiplier effect that Ron was talking about, and the community benefits. And it also lays the table for some of the other conversations that can take place. So for Ron and Judy, I would love your big picture thought is, what would be possible if every municipality in BC meaningfully engaged and purchased from Indigenous enterprises? What do you think would be possible? What could happen? Yeah, go Ron.
Well, I think the possibilities are fantastic. I used a term before, win-win. If we have all sorts of businesses getting business dollars getting generated in a community, it just builds on there and on and on. It's more money for everyone to get things done. Instead of having cutbacks, we start looking at more services. There's Lord knows there's huge demand, but how do you pay for it? So we have more revenues, everybody wins.
And you talked about in some of the notes that we have is also that a lot of your community members are not located on reserve, and so that they're in the economic mainstream, and so that multiplier effect is in throughout the community. And you talked about also increasing in tax bases, and there is quite a lot that is sort of in that multiple layers of benefit around what's possible. How about for you, Judy? What do you think is, what could be possible if all institutional purchasers like yours meaningfully engaged and purchased from Indigenous enterprises?
I'm reminded of Carolyn Hilton and her work with Indigenomics and her discussion around the $100 billion Indigenous economy, and just really motivated by that. And I think, if organizations like GVHA and others are all doing their little bit, which it might just be a little bit, it's all really cumulative. And I think you'll see, hopefully, the effects of that wealth, that Ron was referring to, in the community and helping with socioeconomic gaps in healing and all that. So yeah, lots of positive impact, I think.
Yeah, and that if we look at the Vancouver Island region, there's about $1.5 billion of annual spend that takes place in our region. And if we begin to apply a 5% or even 2% and do the math, we're looking at significant, hundreds and $150 million, or however, my math is, sorry about my right now, because I tried to work that out yesterday. But we're looking at $100 million that then go back into our communities that have those benefits, that provide meaningful employment, that allow communities to build wealth, that allow assets to be held in community by community members and delivering services in relationship. And that's if we begin to look at those targets and how they turn up. So I think there's a significant economic impact that is potential there. And as the final thing, what is one action that you would recommend participants today could take?
I'm like a broken record, but I would go try and meet with the local Indigenous business, maybe make a goal of like 1 a month or 2 a month, and just go and connect, pick up the phone, and use one of the many directories that are in the chat to try to make that connection. And if you're in Victoria, feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you to a few folks. And I'm sure Ron is a plethora of knowledge and connection. So,
but what's one step, Ron, that you would recommend?
I would say reach out to your local Aboriginal Capital Corporation. They're right across Canada. The umbrella group is NACA. They're based in Ottawa, and that may be a very positive step. And from there, referrals could be made.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I'm just going to pop our screen up so that Emma can just share a bit about the upcoming session. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Ron. And I just want to say, Ron is a superstar. As you saw, Callie was going to present today and she got unwell. And so yesterday, Ron was like, I'm in. So we just want to give a huge thank you to Ron for stepping in and sharing his length of time and experience and so on, and for Judy for her energy and inspiration and innovation. So thank you both for the work that you're doing in community. Emma, do you want to chat about our upcoming session?
Yeah, hi everyone. I've still got the speakers pinned, but I think that's okay. I'll just say that coming up on November 10th, we have our next event, which is how can social procurement support my local economy? So really diving deeper into that local multiplier effect and everything that can be done to support small businesses. So we'll be speaking with, as you can see on the screen, Amy Robinson, who's the founder of Loco BC, and Alicia Masong, who's a community economic development planner at the City of Vancouver. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation full of a lot of knowledge from two people who work really closely with supporting local economy. So hope to see you all there, and I'll pop the registration information into the chat right now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And we do have, I put my email in there. And Emma, if you want to put your email in as well, feel free to reach out and ask any questions. Hop on the BCSPI website if you want to register for sessions and see what else is coming up. And yeah, always here to answer questions. Yeah. Any final words, Judy and Ron?
Thanks for your time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks all.
Bye.